Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to have your mind bent a little?
Always up for that.
Today, we're dissecting a conversation between two friends that goes deep.
Hmm.
I mean, really deep, like questioning the very fabric of reality deep.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it is.
Hmm.
They get into physics, sociopaths, Charlie Sheen, you name it.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How do you even get from physics to Charlie Sheen?
You have to hear it to believe it, but trust me, it makes a weird kind of sense.
All right, you've got my attention. Where do we start?
So, picture this. Carlos, one half of our conversational duo, just casually drops this bomb. He's like, yeah, physics proved like a century ago that reality is subjective. I was even going to tweet about it.
Wait, hold up. Did he just say what I think he said? Subjective reality? Isn't that like philosophy 101 stuff?
Exactly, but he's talking in the context of physics.
All right, so we're not talking about your opinion on pineapple pizza being subjective. He's going deeper than that.
Way deeper. He's talking about things like quantum mechanics, relativity,
Yeah.
the big hitters, stuff that even Einstein was wrestling with.
Okay, for those of us who didn't exactly ace quantum physics, what's subjective reality even mean in this context?
Well, it kind of throws the whole one objective reality thing out the window, right?
Right.
It suggests that, to some extent, our individual experiences actually shape the reality we perceive.
All right, so it's not that there's no such thing as reality. It's more like we each have our own little slice of it based on our perception.
Exactly. And those perceptions, those individual realities, can even affect things like our experience of time.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So it's not just that time flies when you're having fun. It actually, in a way, is moving differently for you.
That's the gist of it. Yeah, it's like our brains are constantly filtering and interpreting the world around us, creating these unique subjective realities.
Okay, I think I need to sit with that for a minute. But then they go on to apply this to something even more complex. Personality types, right?
Right. They go on to say that society often rewards emotional detachment, and even wondered if maybe sociopathic tendencies are really just an adaptation to this weird social pressure.
Wow. Okay, that is a bold claim. So it's not that sociopaths are born, it's that they're made.
That's the question they're poking at. And they even bring up those old school self-help books from the 80s, like Looking Out for Number One.
Oh, yeah. The ones that told everyone to be ruthless and put themselves first. That was a whole vibe.
Exactly. So they're asking, what if those books weren't just reflecting a cultural moment, but actually helped to create that kind of cutthroat mentality?
So it's like maybe some people were already wired for that kind of emotional distance, and then society was like, here's a handbook, go forth and conquer.
Exactly. It makes you think about all the subtle ways we're influenced by the world around us. But then they take this even further, questioning if our very definition of a sociopath is outdated.
Okay, now that is getting interesting. What makes them say that?
Well, they argue that the stereotypical image of a sociopath, the one we usually think of.
Like the Wall Street guy in American Psycho.
Exactly. That kind of over-the-top, in-your-face ruthlessness, they're saying that might be changing.
So are they saying there are, like, stealth sociopaths lurking among us? That's a little unnerving.
Well, they brought up Sam Altman, which really got me thinking.
The CEO of OpenAI, what does he have to do with any of this?
On the surface, he's this Silicon Valley superstar who talks about the ethical implications of AI, even advocating for regulations.
Right. It doesn't exactly fit the evil genius stereotype.
Exactly. But that's what makes their point so interesting. What if sociopathy is evolving, becoming more subtle and harder to spot?
So how do we even begin to make sense of that? If the lines are blurring, how do we know who to trust?
That's the million-dollar question,
Yep.
right? And it's a thread we'll keep pulling on as we go deeper into this conversation. So last time, we were really starting to get into it with subjective realities, the potential for society to mold certain personality types.
And let's not forget the stealth sociopaths. I'm still processing that one.
Right. Well, get ready, because things are about to get even more interesting as we delve into their personal lives, especially how their families might have shaped their views.
Because everyone has that family, right? The one that makes you go, maybe that explains a few things.
Totally. And in this case, their family backgrounds are like night and day.
Okay, I'm listening.
So Carlos describes his family as this lively bunch full of big personalities. Like his brother, he's apparently the kind of guy who could charm anyone. And his sister, a natural storyteller, even if her stories were sometimes,
Embellished.
exactly.
Okay.
So imagine growing up in that environment, surrounded by all that charisma and drama.
You'd definitely learn how to read people, that's for sure.
Right. You'd have to, just to keep up. It makes you wonder if all that contributed to his fascination with this stuff in the first place.
Totally. And then you have Casey, who paints a completely different picture of her childhood.
Totally different. While Carlos had all that energy and emotion swirling around him, Casey's dad sounds like he was more on the reserve side, very logical, not exactly Mr. Warmth.
Really?
Yeah. They were talking about how societal expectations can influence people, and it made me think maybe growing up with a parent like that made her hypersensitive to emotional manipulation. Like
Uh-huh.
maybe she developed a radar for it because she had to navigate those waters early on.
It's like her BS detector got a supercharge early on.
Exactly. And they were coming of age in the 80s and 90s when that whole greed is good mentality was huge.
Oh, totally. Remember that book they mentioned, Looking Out for Number One?
Yeah, the one that basically encouraged everyone to be more selfish.
Exactly. Can you imagine the impact that kind of message would have, especially for people already inclined towards a more detached way of thinking? It's almost like culture itself was giving them permission to be ruthless.
And now they're wondering if that kind of ruthlessness might actually be evolving. Like, what if the Gordon Geckos of the world have just gotten better at hiding it?
Okay, now you're bringing us back to the stealth sociopaths.
Exactly. And the example they use is, wait for it, Sam Altman.
The OpenAI guy? I'm not sure I follow.
Right. Because on the surface, he seems like the opposite of a stereotypical sociopath. He's talking about the ethics of AI, pushing for regulation, even warning about the potential dangers.
Yeah, he comes across as pretty thoughtful and concerned.
Exactly. But that's what makes their point so unsettling. What if we've been looking for sociopaths in all the wrong places, looking for the obvious villains instead of the ones who are really good at blending in?
So it's like we're programmed to spot the guy with the handlebar mustache twirling an evil plan, but we're totally missing the guy in the Patagonia vest who's actually pulling all the strings.
And that leaves us with a very unsettling question.
Which is,
If sociopathy is becoming more sophisticated, more subtle, how do we even begin to recognize it, let alone protect ourselves from it?
okay, now that is a question I don't have an answer for.
Me neither. But it's something that Carlos and Casey grapple with as they continue down this rabbit hole. And trust me, it only gets more mind-bending from here. It's like trying to spot a chameleon that's figured out how to blend in with a kaleidoscope.
That is a spot-on analogy, and it gets to the heart of what Carlos and Casey are wrestling with. Our old maps for navigating the world might not be so reliable anymore.
It's like we're still looking for the kick me sign on the back of the sociopath, completely oblivious to the fact that they might be the ones pinning it on us now.
It's a bit of a mind warp, isn't it?
Totally. But it's not just about sociopaths, is it? They seem to be saying this evolution of behavior applies to way more than just one personality type.
Right. It's like the rules of the game are changing, but no one told us, and we're all just running around trying to figure out what the new playbook even looks like.
And that's kind of exciting.
Pretty exciting. How so?
Well, it's forcing us to think differently, to question everything. We can't just rely on old assumptions anymore.
That's a good point. It's like we're being pushed to become more discerning, more aware of the subtle ways we're influenced by the world around us.
And maybe even more aware of ourselves, right?
What do you mean?
Well, like Casey talking about her dad. She could have easily written him off as emotionally distant, but she was open to other possibilities. Maybe he was just wired differently, or maybe he was showing love in his own way.
I see what you mean. It's about questioning those knee-jerk reactions, those assumptions we make about people without even realizing it.
Exactly. And those assumptions can really hold us back, can't they? Not just in how we see others, but also in how we see ourselves.
It's like we're trapped in these invisible boxes of our own making.
Okay, so how do we break out of those boxes? How do we become more aware, more discerning in a world that seems to be constantly trying to pull the wool over our eyes?
I don't think there's any easy answer. But a good starting point might be to just cultivate that sense of curiosity.
Curiosity about what?
About everything. Why do we believe what we believe? What are we missing? Who benefits from us seeing the world a certain way? It's about asking why a lot more often.
So it's like becoming our own personal detectives.
Exactly. Always gathering evidence, looking for clues, being open to new information that might challenge our preconceived notions.
It's not about having all the answers, is it? It's about being comfortable with the not knowing, the uncertainty.
And maybe even embracing it.
Because in a world where the only constant is change, maybe that's the best way to stay ahead of the curve.
Or at least to keep the wool pulled firmly over our own eyes.
Well said. This deep dive has been quite a trip, honestly. From physics to sociopaths, family dynamics, to the very nature of reality. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have. And I think this conversation is a great reminder that the world is a lot more complex and nuanced than we often give it credit for.
Absolutely. There's always more to learn, more to explore, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask the tough questions, even if they make us a little uncomfortable.
Well said. Discomfort often means we're onto something interesting.
Exactly. So, to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this wild ride. Until next time, stay curious out there.